The chamber fell into a tense hush, then shattered with a single shout. Kari Lake, eyes blazing, finger stabbing through the air, bellowed at Jasmine Crockett with venom in her voice, "Get out!" The command cracked like a whip across the room, echoing against the walls, dripping with arrogance. Gasps rippled through the audience. A scene that should have been about ideas suddenly turned into a raw display of domination. And in that instant, the cameras captured more than a clash of words. They caught the very essence of a struggle larger than two women on opposite sides of the aisle. One stood for a politics of fear, of silencing, of exclusion. The other stood quietly, absorbing the insult, preparing a reply not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. The freeze-frame moment froze America in place. Was this really happening? Could dignity withstand the fury of a voice raised in contempt? The world leaned in, breath held, because what unfolded next was no ordinary exchange. It was a turning point, because Crockett's reply didn't just silence Lake, it left an entire nation speechless. To understand why that outburst carried such weight, we have to rewind the tape. This wasn't some backroom argument or an unnoticed committee meeting. This was a debate broadcast to the nation, a stage where every word mattered, where reputations could be built or shattered in the span of a sentence. The lights were bright, the cameras relentless, and the audience watching was not just in the room but spread across millions of homes, phones, and screens. Kari Lake walked onto that stage carrying the armor of media notoriety and the swagger of someone used to commanding attention. She came to play the role of disruptor, of enforcer, determined to dominate with volume and spectacle. But across from her stood Jasmine Crockett, calm, collected, carrying something deeper, an identity rooted in struggle, service, and a relentless belief in dignity. This was not simply politics, it was identity colliding with arrogance, representation standing its ground against dismissal. Every glare, every word, every pause was amplified by the awareness that people far beyond the chamber were watching, judging, choosing sides in real time. And that's what raised the stakes. Because this debate was no longer just about policy, it became a mirror of America itself, and what was said in this room would soon echo across America's living rooms, trending at #1 on Twitter. To understand the fury behind those words, "Get out," we have to step inside the world of Kari Lake. Once a familiar face on local television, she built her brand not on quiet leadership but on spectacle. She knew how to hold a camera's gaze, how to turn a moment of conflict into a headline, and how to channel outrage into power. That talent carried her into the political arena, where her sharp tongue and fiery presence quickly became her signature weapon. But behind the aura of confidence lay a strategy rooted in intimidation. Lake thrived on disruption. Her rallies weren't measured conversations, they were storms. Her interviews weren't dialogues, they were battlegrounds. The louder she spoke, the more she convinced herself and her supporters that sheer volume could substitute for vision. To many, she embodied the politics of provocation, brash, unyielding, and proud of it. In debates, she rarely sought understanding, she sought dominance, cutting off opponents, dismissing their voices, leaning on the performance of strength rather than the substance of ideas, and it worked, until she met someone who refused to play by her script. What makes her outburst at Crockett so telling is not just the word itself, but the instinct behind it. "Get out" wasn't a slip of the tongue, it was the purest expression of her political persona. A reflex to silence, a command to erase, a declaration that power belongs only to those loud enough, bold enough, ruthless enough to claim it. But arrogance has its limits, and history has a way of humbling even the loudest voices, because in that chamber at that moment, Lake didn't realize she was writing the setup to her own unraveling. The stage was set for her opponent to turn silence into strength. Before Jasmine Crockett stood in that chamber staring down the force of Kari Lake's fury, she had already fought 100 battles that prepared her for this very moment. She wasn't born into privilege, nor did she rise on the shoulders of media spectacle. Her story is the story of grit, of a young black woman from Texas who learned early on that the world doesn't always open doors for you. Sometimes you have to push them open yourself. Her journey began with education and determination. She pursued the law not as a path to wealth, but as a weapon for justice. In courtrooms across her state, Crockett built a reputation as a fierce defender of those society often overlooked. She took on cases others avoided. She represented voices that were dismissed. She refused to be intimidated by titles or positions of power. Each victory wasn't just a notch in her career, it was proof that dignity could win, even in spaces designed to exclude it. That fire carried her into politics. In the halls of government, she brought with her the same unshakable conviction that guided her in the courtroom. To some, her presence was disruptive, too bold, too unapologetic, too unwilling to play the quiet role assigned to women of color in power. But to others, she was exactly what they had been waiting for. A leader who didn't bend, didn't shrink, and didn't back down. And that's what made the confrontation with Kari Lake so symbolic. Crockett wasn't just another opponent across the stage. She was the living embodiment of every immigrant who had been told they didn't belong, every young woman who had been told to wait her turn, every working-class family who had been told their voice didn't matter. So when Kari Lake shouted, "Get out!" it wasn't just an insult hurled across a room. It was a test of everything Crockett stood for. Would she bow to arrogance, or would she turn the sting of exclusion into a statement of unshakable presence? The answer would come in a moment so sharp, so undeniable, that it would ripple far beyond the chamber, because Crockett's story had never been about surrender, and this time would be no different. The air in the chamber thickened as the exchange grew sharper. What began as a tense back and forth about policy quickly spiraled into something far more personal. Kari Lake leaned into her familiar performance, cutting off, talking over, raising her voice just enough to dominate the soundscape. She gestured aggressively, her tone dripping with condescension, as though volume alone could drown out truth. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. With every interruption, she held her ground, her eyes steady, her voice measured. The contrast couldn't have been clearer, one side unraveling in noise, the other rooted in composure. Observers in the room felt it. The tension wasn't just political, it was cultural. It was a clash between entitlement and earned presence, between someone demanding respect and someone embodying it. Lake pressed harder, her voice rising with each jab. She accused, she mocked, she sought to provoke. And still Crockett sat poised, waiting, her silence more cutting than any insult. The more Lake raged, the more the balance of power shifted, not in her favor but against her. The spectacle she intended to control was slipping. By the time she finally snapped, shouting those two words, "Get out!" the chamber erupted. Gasps, murmurs, the sharp intake of disbelief. It was a moment designed to humiliate, but instead it exposed something far more damaging: desperation. And that's when the silence broke. Because Jasmine Crockett was about to answer, not with noise, not with rage, but with a reply that would turn the entire debate on its head. For a split second, time itself seemed to stall. Kari Lake's voice still echoed, "Get out!" hanging in the air like smoke after a firecracker. The room froze, eyes darting to Jasmine Crockett, waiting to see if she would stumble, retreat, or lash out. But Crockett did none of those things. She did something far more powerful. She straightened her posture, locked her gaze on Lake, and let the silence linger. Seconds stretched into an eternity, the kind of pause that makes every heartbeat louder. Reporters hesitated at their keyboards. Even Lake's supporters leaned forward, curious. Then, with a calm steadiness that cut sharper than any shout, Crockett spoke. Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried dignity, resolve, and the unshakable certainty of someone who refused to be erased. "I am not leaving," she said, each word deliberate, unhurried. "I belong here just as much as anyone. And the fact that you think shouting will change that says more about your fear than it ever will about my place." The chamber stirred. A low wave of reaction rolled through the audience, gasps, nods, murmurs of approval. Lake's eyes flickered, the confidence in her glare cracking for the first time. Crockett didn't stop there. She leaned into the moment, weaving her own story into the confrontation. "People like me have been told to get out for generations, get out of schools, get out of neighborhoods, get out of politics. But here's the truth. Every time we're told to leave, we come back stronger. Because America is not built on exclusion. It is built on contribution, sacrifice, and the voices of those who refuse to disappear." It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a declaration, a reclamation. Crockett's words resonated beyond the walls, through the cameras, into the hearts of those who had felt that sting themselves. Her tone remained calm, but the weight of her message shook the room more than Lake's shouting ever could. By the time she finished, the silence was deafening. Not the silence of intimidation, but of awe. The kind of silence that follows a line destined to be replayed, quoted, remembered. Kari Lake shifted in her seat, suddenly smaller, her performance undone. Because Crockett hadn't just answered the insult, she had redefined the battlefield. She reminded everyone watching that true power doesn't roar, it resonates. And as the cameras zoomed in, capturing Lake's unraveling and Crockett's composure, one thing became undeniable: this was the moment the debate flipped. But what no one in that chamber fully grasped yet was how quickly Crockett's words would spread. Because the storm wasn't contained to the room, the internet was about to ignite. The chamber's silence didn't last long. Within minutes, the confrontation leapt from the debate hall to the digital battlefield. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's reply flooded Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, each replayed with captions blazing, "This is how you shut down hate." The hashtags rose fast: #Crockett clapback, #GetOut challenge, #dignity wins. By the end of the night, her words were trending at #1. What struck viewers wasn't just the eloquence of her response, but the contrast. Kari Lake had yelled, Crockett had spoken. One relied on volume, the other on conviction. Memes captured the imbalance, split screens showing Lake red-faced and Crockett steady, with captions like "noise versus power." Celebrities chimed in, amplifying the moment. Commentators across cable networks called it the line of the night. Activists posted threads unpacking its deeper meaning, how Crockett's reply tapped into centuries of struggle against exclusion, how her poise turned insult into inspiration. Even late-night comedians couldn't resist, replaying Lake's outburst followed by Crockett's mic drop with roaring audience laughter. And ordinary people, immigrants, students, workers, and parents shared the clip with their own captions. "This is me at work. This is my grandmother's story. This is why representation matters." By morning, Crockett wasn't just a politician who answered back, she was a symbol. Her words had traveled far beyond the debate stage, threading themselves into kitchen table conversations, college group chats, and church discussions. The ripple effect was undeniable. What began as a command meant to silence had instead ignited a chorus of voices rising in solidarity. The villain's outburst had backfired, and the hero's composure had turned into a cultural moment. But for all the celebration, another question lingered. Would this clash remain a viral clip, or would it reshape the narrative of who truly holds power in American politics? In the days that followed, pundits dissected every second of the exchange. But what lingered in people's hearts wasn't just the drama of a viral clash. It was the deeper truth behind Jasmine Crockett's words. In a moment designed to belittle her, she chose not to match anger with anger. Instead, she reframed the attack into something universal, something that transcended politics. Her reply became more than a comeback. It was a lesson in resilience, in how dignity holds its ground even when confronted with the sharpest hostility. She reminded the nation that true strength isn't measured in decibels but in clarity, calm, and conviction. For every immigrant family told they didn't belong, for every child growing up hearing they weren't enough, her words carried the promise that exclusion doesn't define worth, contribution does. Commentators called it a masterclass in composure. Supporters saw it as a blueprint for what politics could be, not a shouting match, but a space where courage and respect outlast rage. And even some critics admitted that Lake's outburst had exposed the weakness of relying on bluster without substance. In the end, Crockett transformed the insult into affirmation. She showed that when someone tries to push you out, the most powerful answer is to stand taller, to anchor yourself so deeply in truth that no voice can move you. And that is why her words reverberated beyond headlines, because they weren't just about one woman shutting down another. They were about reclaiming space, about rewriting the story of who belongs in America. Yet even as the applause grew, one lingering question hovered over the nation. If dignity could triumph so powerfully in a single moment, what might happen if that spirit carried forward into the battles yet to come? The echoes of that debate didn't fade overnight. They deepened. In communities across the country, Crockett's words became a touchstone. Families gathered around dinner tables, replaying the clip for grandparents who nodded knowingly, remembering their own battles with being told to get out. In dorm rooms, college students passed the video around like a torch, voices rising with excitement. This is how you fight back, with dignity, not rage. Op-eds poured in, each passing the significance. Some writers saw Crockett's reply as a generational shift, proof that a new kind of leadership was rising, one less interested in shouting matches and more invested in moral clarity. Think pieces in major outlets described it as the viral moment that reframed the politics of belonging. Political strategists debated feverishly behind closed doors. Could this spark new momentum for a progressive movement tired of being shouted down? Could it galvanize voters who were waiting for someone to stand tall in the face of arrogance? Crockett, once a regional name, suddenly found herself spoken of as a national figure, a voice of strength whose words resonated far beyond her district. Even comedy shows joined the chorus, parodying Lake's outburst while replaying Crockett's reply to raucous applause. What had started as a heated command became a cultural turning point. But as the headlines swelled and the applause grew louder, a question lingered in the air, pulsing like a drumbeat. Was this just a viral moment? Or the beginning of a political shift that could redefine America's future? The story of that night was never really about two women clashing across a debate stage. It was about what their confrontation revealed. Kari Lake's shout was loud, but it was hollow, an echo of politics built on exclusion and intimidation. Jasmine Crockett's reply, by contrast, was steady, deliberate, and rooted in something deeper than volume: truth. In that moment, Crockett embodied a lesson America has had to learn again and again, that dignity outlasts hate, and courage always cuts sharper than arrogance. Her words reminded people that history is not shaped by those who demand silence through force, but by those who speak up with conviction, even when the odds are stacked against them. The confrontation became more than a viral clip. It turned into a parable for our times. The idea that power is not about shouting the loudest, but about standing unshaken in the face of disrespect. Crockett's calm was not weakness, it was strength, the kind that carries entire communities forward. And that is why her reply will be remembered long after the shouting fades, because it wasn't just about Kari Lake and Jasmine Crockett, it was about the kind of country we want to be, one where every voice has value and where courage, not contempt, defines the future. And so we return to that flashpoint, the raised voice, the pointed finger, the command meant to diminish. Get out. It was supposed to end the conversation. Instead, it began one. Jasmine Crockett's reply didn't just silence Kari Lake, it reverberated across the nation, a quiet thunder that reminded us what real strength looks like. This moment was never just about a clash on stage, it was about every time someone has been told they don't belong. Every moment dignity was challenged by arrogance, every instance when truth stood face to face with hate. Crockett didn't just defend herself, she defended the idea that belonging isn't granted by the loud, but earned by the steadfast. And now the question is what we do with it. Do we let this moment live and die as a viral clip, or do we carry it forward as a standard for the kind of leadership and courage we want to see? Because history shows us voices like Crockett's don't just echo for a day, they build movements. If the story moved you, share it. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in America's unfolding drama. And most of all, take it with you. Dignity is stronger than hate, and courage always outlasts arrogance.